trying to avoid.
Interesting. I was not aware of that. Also, you'd brought up BRICS. I personally don't think enough people understand what BRICS is. So BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
Argentina is now part of it.
Last time I checked, I think it was 22.
Yeah.
At least 22 countries are now part of it, and the whole premise is to destabilize.
It's to get off the American dollar, get off dependence, because what we've done is we've used the power of the dollar as a military tool. And we've used it, for example, we're using it against Iran now, but we've used it against Russia, and we hold people's money because their money is basically, therefore Knox is the United States, is our central banks. And so when they do something bad and we then shut off their cash, countries are just saying, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to use petrodollars anymore. We're going to shift to our own currencies, or we're going to create a global currency, which is one of the things they're trying to do with BRICS. And we're going to get off the American dollar to take the power away from America. And if that happens, the U.S. economy will go into a free fall. So, it's already happening. The question is, how fast is it going to happen? And are we going to be able to put safeguards in place to avoid a massive depression that could make the Great Depression look like a cakewalk?
Mentioned Iraq is now a proxy to Iran.
We have, I just added that, we have a $34 trillion debt right now. The service on that debt, the cost of servicing that debt is now bigger than our military budget. It's about $1 billion a year. Within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that we collect in taxes is going to go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, 100%. And that's if interest rates don't rise. If interest rates rise, that happens much faster. We added another $1 trillion to the debt in the last 100 days. President Biden and President Trump are the guys who are most responsible for that. President Trump, during his 4 years, added $8 trillion to the debt. That's more money than was spent by every administration from George Washington to George W. Bush. Every administration before him, 283 years of history, he spent more in 4 years. And then he shut down all the businesses at the same time. And then Biden continued those policies, the lockdowns, and then, and this, absurd spending, which is unsustainable. And neither of them are talking about it. And we need to start talking about it. And we need to, the big problem with the debt is the chronic disease epidemic, which is now costing us $4.3 trillion a year, which is 5 times our military budget. And then the military budget. Military budget is about $890 billion. But if you include the cost of the wars, which is, $300 billion in veterans administration, and then all the national security costs, it's about $1.3 trillion a year. And we have to cut that. We can no longer afford to be the policemen of the world. It's not helping us. It's hurting us in every way.
Can you go into a little detail on who we?
It's not helping us. It's hurting us in every way.
Can you go into a little detail on who we owe the debt to?
A lot of the debt is owned by China. A lot of it is owned by Japan. They're in as much trouble as we are because, they don't want that debt to crash either. But China is now switching away from the dollar. And, they're all trying to get away from the bomb, to get out of the splatter zone before the bomb goes off. And a lot of the debt is just to U.S. investors and banks and, investment houses who have purchased U.S. bonds. I mean, I own a certain amount of bonds, treasury bonds, right? And that I bought some of them after, after I won I was part of the team that won the Monsanto case, and I got a little bit of cash, and I put some of that in bonds. Well, so some of that debt is owed to me. So, but I think the biggest creditor is China.
You had mentioned Iraq is becoming a proxy to Iran. I'm a former special ops guy, spent a lot of time in Iraq, a lot of time in Afghanistan, and so I have a lot of ties within that community still. And I've heard rumors that we will be going back to Iraq already because of the stuff going on in Israel, Iran getting involved. I mean, I don't think it was ever stabilized. But do you have any insight on that?
No, I mean,
we're sending our guys back into another country where we've abandoned lots of weapons.
Listen, we have 800 bases around the world. China has one base. Russia has 1.5. We have 800, and each one of them is, an opportunity for a new little war. And of course, you have, the big military contractors, Northrop Grumman and Boeing and Lockheed and General Dynamics and, these others. They're all owned by one company, which is BlackRock. And BlackRock has the contracts to destroy Ukraine, and it has the contract to rebuild Ukraine. So, and it's one of the biggest owners of the Republican and Democratic Party. And the Ukraine war is really about the expansion of NATO. We wanted to put NATO and President Putin and every president before him have said that's a red line. You can't put NATO in Ukraine. The Russians have been invaded 3 times through Ukraine. Last time, Hitler killed 1 out of every 7 Russians. We've never experienced an invasion like that. Russians haven't. Everybody remembers it. And they don't want a foreign enemy army in Ukraine. And particularly, they don't want an army with nuclear weapons. And, we have put nuclear-ready systems, these Aegis missile systems that Lockheed makes in Romania and Poland, so we made those NATO country. Why do we want to go into NATO? Here's one of the reasons. Why do we want every country in Europe? We promised in 1992, when Gorbachev said, I'm going to remove the walls in Europe. I'm going to allow you, the West, to reunite Germany under NATO, and I'm going to move out 450,000 Soviet troops from Germany, from East Germany, and I'm going to allow you to march NATO soldiers into their barracks. Okay, he could never go back to Russia after that. He went back, but he was despised. Nobody went to his funeral, but he did it because he wanted to end the Cold War. But he said, I want one promise from you before I do this. He said this to James Baker, to President Bush at that time, and to John Major. He said, I want one promise, which is after I give you Germany, you cannot move NATO you cannot move NATO to the east until all the other countries we're going to march out of. James Baker, who was the Secretary of State, famously told Gorbachev, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. And in 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the first of the neocons, says, okay, here's a plan. He publishes a plan for moving NATO into every former Soviet territory. And people go crazy at that time. George Kennan, who is the most important diplomat in modern American history, who was the architect of the containment policy during the Cold War, he said, if you do that, you're going to turn Russia into an enemy. You should be treating it as a friend. You should be welcoming it to the global community and using it as a bulwark against Chinese expansion. Kissinger said that. George Kennan said that. George Kennan said, if you do this, you're going to force Russia into a violent response. Bill Pierce, who was then the Secretary of Defense, threatened to resign to Clinton. He said, if you do this, I'm going to resign. It's so destabilizing to move NATO to the east. Bill Perry, who was then, and Bill Pierce is now the head of the CIA. Bill Perry, who was then the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, said the same thing. He said, you're forcing Russia into ultimately a violent response if you keep moving NATO to the east. What do? We did it anyway. Why do we want to move NATO to the east? There's all kinds of geopolitical reasons that the neocons want to drive because they like conflict. But, the big reason is that when a new country signs onto NATO, it has to then change all of its weapons specifications, weapons purchases to NATO specifications, which means it has to buy all of its weapons from Lockheed, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman, and the U.S. military contractors that are all owned by BlackRock. So there's this economic imperative to drive NATO into all of these new countries. And, Putin said again and again, if you go in there, we are going to have to fight back. What do we do? In 2014, the CIA goes in with USAID and overthrows the elected government of Ukraine. And we put in a Western government. The Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, who's the top neocon at that time, we now have a tape of her talking to the U.S. ambassador a month before the coup, hand-picking the cabinet that would replace the neutral government with a pro-Western government. So then we go in there, we overthrow their elected government. We put in a government that's sympathetic to us. Putin immediately says, oh, well, now they're going to put the U.S. fleet in Vladivostok, which was Russia's, for 340 years, their only southern port. That's where the Soviet fleet is, which is in Crimea. And he says, if you do this, we're going to go into Crimea. He goes in Crimea. He doesn't fire a shot because the people of Crimea have always wanted to be back with Russia. They voted 90-10 to go back to Russia. And then he says, and then there's a revolution. There's, this new government comes in and basically illegalizes the Russian language. There used to be two languages in Ukraine, Russian and Ukrainian. Now they say, no, the official language is now Ukrainian. You can't speak Russian. We don't teach it in the schools, etc. And they begin enacting these other oppressive mandates against the Russian, ethnic Russians in Donbass. And so there are protests in Donbass. Those protests turn violent. And, the question is, why do they turn violent? The assumption is there's right-wingers in the new government that we put in who kill 14,000 people from Donbass and Lugansk. And so Putin says, look, I'm going to go in there. Donbass and Lugansk vote to join Russia, the Russian Federation. Putin says, I don't want you. You stay with Ukraine, but here's a proposal. And he gives what is called the Minsk Accords, which Germany approves of, France approves of, and UK approve of. And the Minsk Accords say, we're going to keep NATO out of Ukraine. We're going to give Donbass and Lugansk autonomy, just like Montreal, Quebec, part of Canada. You'll still be part of Ukraine, but you'll be able to keep the Russian language. And then he also asked to denazify some of denazify the new government that we had put in to remove some of the extreme right-wingers. And all of these nations approve of this agreement. And Zelensky runs in 2019, and he's an actor and a comedian, no political involvement at all. He runs on one issue. I'm going to sign the Minsk Accords, and there's going to be peace with Russia. He wins 70% of the vote. So, overwhelmingly, the people wanted peace. They wanted that agreement. Suddenly, he gets in office and he pivots and he says, I'm not going to sign it. Why did that happen? There's two assumptions. We don't know, but there's two assumptions. One, he was threatened by right-wingers within his own government. Two, the United States, Victoria Nuland, told him he couldn't sign it. So Putin then sends in 40,000 troops. The West says, oh, he's trying to conquer Europe. He's like Hitler marching on Europe. He sends 40,000 troops. He clearly does not even want to conquer Ukraine. Ukraine had 44 million people in it. He can't conquer with 40,000 troops.
Yeah.
What Putin says, I just want you back at the negotiating table. Zelensky then says, well, ask the United States to help him negotiate. We won't help him. He asked President Xi of China to help him. Xi won't help him. He goes to Naftali Bennett, the prime minister of Israel, and Israel says, yeah, we'll help you. And to Erdogan in Turkey. So Erdogan, Naftali Bennett referee discussions between Zelensky and Putin. And they come to an agreement, which is like Minsk Accords too. It's the same agreement. And they sign the agreement. And the main thing Putin wants is we agree never to put NATO into Ukraine. And they agree to that. We sign that agreement, and Joe Biden sends Boris Johnson over from the UK, who's now the former prime minister, to tell Zelensky he's got to tear up the agreement because we wanted the war. And Zelensky tears it up. And, since then, there's probably been 600,000 Ukrainian kids who have died over there, totally unnecessarily. My son went over there and fought with the Foreign Legion. And he was a machine gunner in a special forces unit during the Kharkiv offensive. Connor and I argued every night at dinner about Ukraine. And when the war started, he had supported U.S. aid, and he felt like he shouldn't be one of these people who were advocating a war and then sitting on the sidelines and not willing to fight it. So he didn't tell us where he was going. He just disappeared. He went over there and he joined the Foreign Legion, and he worked for the first 3 or 4 weeks as a drone operator, which was, as it turns out, that's the most dangerous job because the Russians can tell when you turn on the drone. And it's mainly an artillery war. So they would then, hit the drone operator with artillery. And they had to turn it on while they were in the back of a pickup truck and then keep the truck moving. And then he became a machine gunner for that unit. But, the people that he was in that unit with are almost all gone.
Everything is done 100%.
People that he was in that unit with are almost all gone.
Man, is he still going over there?
No. He's here to finish law school, and he's now, thank God, practicing law.
Right on. You had mentioned something else, switching gears a little bit, how we would instigate China into invading Taiwan. How do you think we would instigate China into invading Taiwan?
If we keep trying to militarize the South China Sea, they're going to respond by militarizing it themselves. And, it's the same thing we did with Russia. If you treat somebody like an enemy and you say, we want a hot war, they got to start arming themselves. And, China had never wanted to put a lot of money into its military, and it never has. But now it's putting huge amounts of money, and China is very smart. And it's a rich country. They have huge cash reserves, and they have the ability to quickly build a military, and they're building a smart military. They're now, because of these hypersonic weapons, a lot of the assumptions are, our military, by the way, is in, I don't know how to politely say it, but it's in the crapper. The jets don't work. The equipment is broken. The enlistments are down, I think, by 45%, and there's so much waste and so much corruption, and the acquisitions part, and the whole assumption, that upon which NATO is based is that we can get 1 million troops across the Atlantic Ocean if there is an invasion from the east. But we can't do that anymore because these hypersonic weapons, which there's really no defense, there'd be so many troop carriers that would sink that the American people would not tolerate it anymore. A lot of the assumptions that that current military strategy is based on are archaic.
And on top of that, I mean, the FBI director just came out and said that they have infiltrated our power grid and our water supply, our water treatment plants, and so I've been on top of this for a long time, been talking about it for years. It sounds to me like it's pretty much a light switch and the power goes out, and we're barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah.
But well, thank you. Let's get into your life story a little bit. Where did you grow up?
So I